Stormcast Eternals, not just any type of Stormcast Eternals. We are talking all things dragons. The dragons have come, and we're going to talk just a little dragon, not talk about all the dragons, we're talking about little dragon. And what I mean by that is my guest, Cody Saults, has done incredibly well at the LVO, went 4-1 with dragons. But it wasn't just a full dragon list. It was actually a mixed Stormcast list with some dragons. So I'm going to talk to Cody a little bit about what came up with this list. Where did he kind of come from? What did he learn? And also, why wouldn't you just go all dragons, right? I think we've kind of seen in the meta and at tournaments, people like running the Nitroconus with all the Stormdrake Guard. So I'm going to get his take on that list versus as well the list that he ran and why pros and cons on adding you maybe Liberators, Vindictors, shooting, whatever it might be. Maybe Fulminators. Maybe Fulminators need to be in the list. But before we get into it, Cody is hiding his visuals, not because he is Kazurai and he's scarred in his face, but actually because I think he's Krondus. He actually is a dragon living in a cave. But I'll throw it over to Cody. G'day, Cody. Welcome. And nice to have you here. You're also from Battle Ready Wargaming. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're
yes, sir.
Your new crew.
And you got to out my secrets like that, man. I'm trying to keep myself under wraps.
So if anyone doesn't know who you are, Cody, and you are mysterious, clearly, anything you want to introduce yourself with?
Yeah, as you're saying, I represent Battle Ready Wargaming. We got a team that's centered out of North Florida, South Georgia. Just kind of getting off the ground. They actually just hosted a 40K major last weekend that went swimmingly. But yeah, long-term 40K player. Last year, branched into Age of Sigmar. Honestly, like the dragons were something that got me into Age of Sigmar. They just look so cool. And some of the models for AOS, like I started out in Death. And like I just wanted to collect the models, and then we had some friends to play, and then it just took off from there, man.
I don't want to like throw shade over the fence, but we had the better models. Like I'm not going to apologize. Like 40K got some cool models. Like you see the some of the new kits out there, and they're pretty cool. But I look at our kits, and I'm like, man, 40K players must get jealous, and they must look over the fence thinking the grass is certainly greener. But I'm not going to throw shade at our 40K friends. What made you jump? Out of curiosity, and I actually didn't know that you were a 40K player. What made you make the jump?
Yeah, so I've actually had this discussion with a couple of friends of mine and some other people who have made the jump to Age of Sigmar. And like you said, not to throw shade, 40K is a great game. There's a lot of tactical depth to it. But there was a moment I remember distinctly where I had played an RTT. I was through 3 rounds, and I had 3 great games with 3 great opponents. No rules quandaries, nothing. It was swimming. But of all 3 of those games, somebody asked me if I had fun, and I just kind of stalled out a little bit because they were good games. They were quality games, good technical games of 40K. But if you ask me if I like had fun, like went to a theme park, had fun, I honestly couldn't say that I'd had a blast playing those games. And 40K, there's so much depth and nuance and nitpicking over this one guy in the squad gets this one pistol and this trait, and that at a certain point building a list feels more like homework than a hobby. But then one of my friends is like, well, come play Age of Sigmar with us, and I picked up a Death Army for the first time, and with the simplified rules kind of stripped down and more efficient, and in that I think a little more elegant, it's hard to not get excited when a Vampire Lord on a zombie dragon charges unit of orc gore gruntas. Like there's nothing about that to not enjoy. So it helps me take the game a little less serious. It feels like a little less work putting together lists. And when somebody asks me if I have fun playing Age of Sigmar, win or lose, I can generally say yes.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And this weekend I just played at a tournament, like it was a store tournament. I wasn't taking it too seriously. But I wanted to run Kragnos and just run forward. I ran 2 Mega Gargants and I ran Kragnos. And my goal was just to run forward and smash things. So I totally can appreciate where you're coming from with it. But let's talk Sigmar, right? So you've jumped and you come to Death, and you've started on Death and you've landed on Stormcast. Why Stormcast and why at the LVO? And I'm really curious on this question because when I looked at the list of the LVO, And people might be wondering, why on earth you keep doing all these LVO talks? Well, first off, it's been the biggest tournament we've had in a long time. 180 players, massive tournament, good diversity of lists. But what really stood out to me, Cody, and I don't know if it stood out to you, was how many Stormcast lists there were. There was like very little Illumineth, very little of a whole bunch of armies, but there were so many Stormcast, like more than I would have expected. So I guess twofold, why did you go with Stormcast? And were you surprised with how many Stormcast players there were?
So again, like what really made me jump to Stormcast is the dragons. I started out with Death. I was doing really well in the season with Death, but they just look so cool. And it's one of the very first times I can remember in either side, 40k Age of Sigmar with this hobby, where I was like, I see that's up for pre-order. I love that model. I'm going to play it no matter what it is. And then they released the rules, and I was just doing backflips because they were just so busted. And from the word go, their data sheet, well, yeah, I'll just call it their data sheet for now. But
so good. War Scroll. We all know what you're talking about.
Their War Scroll seemed busted, and I just like the ability to double move them with the heavy armor and just pin your opponent in their deployment zone, plus all the offensive output they have just seemed really broken. And then, they got one round of nerfs in the Warlord trait, no longer applying to them as monsters. So no -1 to wound. I'm like, cool, they're still good. They got 2 points hikes, and I still just couldn't see a way that they weren't just going to be solid on the tabletop. And really the thing that got me is that once per game double move. Because even for a unit of 2 of them, you've got 18 wounds behind a 3-up armor that you can, all out defense, put them on a 2-up. There are ways to give them feel no pains, as you've seen with James' list. There are other ways, you can take a different group with Stormcast and give them a 6 at feel no pain in your objectives. But it was just really that ability to pin my opponent in their deployment zone and prevent them from being able to participate meaningfully with the objectives on the field. My first list, or my list that I was winning tournaments with Death, had a big brick of 30 wolves, the dire wolves. And I just throw a bunch of buffs on them with Belladama, auto advance them 6, activate the 6-inch pile in, and just pile into my opponent. Hopefully I got fight twice off, and just here's 60 wounds worth of wolves in your deployment zone, tagging everything. Chew through that. I'm going to go sit on objectives. And it felt very much the same. I can just pressure my opponent early, and it does not matter if they kill him. They just sit there, clog up their side of the board, and let me play the game while my opponent struggles to deal with the dragons. So they started out, I'm glad they got the nerfs, honestly, because they seemed a little oppressive at first brush. But once they got the nerfs, they're just a very stable all-around unit. There's no role in the army that dragons can't serve. And their mobility, their versatility, their ability to, even accidentally get past really thick saves with the Mortal Wound Breath. They participate in just about every part of their game in a meaningful way.
And where they participate the most, agreed. I absolutely agree with you. Anyone who has listened to the channel for a long time has heard me say this game is a movement game, not a combat or a shooting game. Movement is number one. The rest kind of follows. This is where the dragons really play to its strengths. And whether you're bringing it in as a coalition unit into Cities of Sigmar, and I want to get your thoughts as well on the 2 big dragons as well, because I have not seen many competitive big dragon lists. And I don't know, there's an interesting tournament coming up in the UK that's trialing a set of rules. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I'm curious about it. That said that the Stormdrake Guard are only going to be a battle line if Krondus or Kazurai is your general. I thought, that's an interesting take, maybe to reduce a bit of spam going out there. Because I think one thing is people are just chucking in that Lord Draconis, and then just all the little dragons. And it's a super elite army, but it's just like absolutely spamming. And I'm not saying spamming is wrong, but I think some people are just like trying to put the brakes on a little.
I think that's perfectly fair. It was supposed to be a GT, ended up being an RTT down in Orlando that I went and played, and we had a Christmas party the night before. Got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, drove the 4 hours down to Orlando, got there in time, and I was so exhausted. I was running off 2 monster that my round 1, I actually forgot 2 of my dragons. I was running the 11 dragon list, and I left an entire unit, 2 of them, on the bottom shelf of my cart and forgot about them. We played the game, and my opponent conceded going into turn 2 because he was shoved in his deployment zone and almost tabled. If you can do that with 340 points off the board, it's probably time to address the spam issue.
They're good. Look, yeah. I'm not going to deny it. They are good. They are absolutely good. And, you know, Robert in the chat made an interesting comment and said they're second best at everything. And I would mostly agree because they're not a massive combat model. Like, they do good in combat, but they're not going to probably pull down a Mega Gargant by themselves, you know, unless you got some crazy buffs and some crazy boost to them, right? They're not going to pull down something with shooting with his fiery breath. It's way too swingy. But what they do, and they do really well, is they play in all the phases. So they are a great utility model. They've got the speed to be able to pin you in with the 3-inch coherency. They've got really fast movements, as you said, the double move once per game. And they've got some good shooting attacks as well to either take out those support heroes to be able to bring down those wounds before they charge. And obviously you got some even more boosts from the lance charge. So they are good, but I wouldn't say they're the greatest of everything, except movement. They're an exceptional movement.
I would agree at that, and I think people think about them the wrong way. So when I sit down to build my list, I think hammers and anvils, and I always want something to be able to take a hit and something to be able to give a hit. And I think a lot of people look at those dragons and they think hammer, but I use them as anvils. Like it's like we said, if you got a unit of 4 dragons, that's what 36 wounds behind a 3-up armor with the potential for feel no pain. That's a lot to chew through. All out defense, mystic shield. If you run a Castello, you can give them just a +1 of their saves, and they are second best at everything. But what they're really good at doing is taking that hit and being deceptively tough. And that's what I use them for. Honestly, that's with my LVO list. They were the anvil to hold things in place, while the crossbows picked off what needed to be picked off. I use them as an anvil.
All right, so we're spoiling Christmas, and this is why I wanted to talk to Cody, right? Because Cody's list, and we'll bring up the rules in a minute, and then I'll get into the list, right? Because I'd love to get Cody's thoughts on his list, and his list was a mixed list. And then we have James O'Brien's list, who had top 8 with 5-0, but he was just all dragons. And I'd love to know the pros and cons on either side, and almost like if you go full dragons, what do you gain versus what do you lose? Versus what probably I like more, which is that mixed arms list, having maybe some Vindictors or some Liberators, having some Long Strikes, or having some, I almost said Castigators, and I don't want Castigators. I want Adjudicators, you know, just a couple of like, do I need like a Lord Relictor? Do I need Gardas? Do I need Bastion? You know what I mean? Like that mixed force is probably more of my style as opposed to just how many Stormdrake Guard can I put into a list. I'm a little bit worried that the Stormkeep, which is a Stormcast podcast, is saying that the age of Drakes is over. We are now entering the age of Hearthguard Berserkers. If you've been into the Fire Slayers chat lately, you would see it's a dumpster fire. People thinking it's the worst battle tome ever. But we had that a couple of months ago with Nurgle. But that actually might lead me to, you probably segued into one thing I wanted to talk about, but Stormkeep segued me into another. So I'll quickly deviate to Stormkeep. Fire Slayers, Deepkin. Do either of those factions worry you so far? Like, obviously, it's only like battle tomes are literally hitting the shelves in the next 24 hours. Do you see a world where IDK is going to stop you from shooting what you want to shoot? Or a Fire Slayer is going to be pulling down your dragons?
Oh, 100%. And the Fire Slayers book has some cool tech. Not going to deny that. But I think, and this is my personal opinion. I'm sure there's people who are going to agree with me. People are going to try to light me up in the chat. But I think the Idoneth Deepkin book is the death of the Dragon Army. Because we've been doing some play testing with the points we've had so far, and you know we've had the reviews coming out that give us kind of like the broad strokes of what the Idoneth do, and even in play testing, like if you can control where the dragon's mortal wounds are going, like you can make a 4-man unit of dragons bounce off a Leviathan turn 1. And that's huge. That's huge. If the 1-drop all dragons list, the Alpha Strike list, cannot Alpha Strike properly, that's the list. You're done. Because the last thing you want to do is get double turned right in the face of a Deepkin army, you know, when they can activate all their buffs and get into you back. So the ability to regulate what and where you can shoot, we did the math. Like a unit of the defense eels can really just soak a lot of the damage from the dragons. The turtle soaks a lot of damage from the dragons. But even just the ability to just put one character and make them waste that free breath attack from the Knight Draconis into like a cheap 115 point character or something like that. Here you go. You can have him. Good ability. But I think Ideneth coming out does fill a very good niche, and I think it does settle in nicely with the rock, paper, scissors of it, because they're very much a take the charge and then dish it back kind of army, whereas dragons are take the offensive and charge. So I think lists with dragons are very much going to have to change what they look like and respect that Ideneth control over the shooting phase and their want to take the hit. That army is going to battle ball up, wait for you to come in, and then dish it back when you get there.
Yeah, I will say that they don't have a lot of wards in their army, so the mortal wounds will be good for you. The drink in a second. I'm losing my voice. It's too early. Mortal wounds will cut through them because they don't have a great save. But you're right. Like when we look at the control of Forgotten Nightmare, which allows them to, you only can target a model for shooting if it is the closest. So if they have a unit of defensive eels, or if they're going to have a turtle or an eidolon or whatever, even like a cheap screen of thralls, you're not going to be able to pick your shooting attack. And I partially wonder how big that's going to be, Cody, because often you're probably going to, depending on what you're about to face, there's a good chance you're going to shoot what you want to charge, unless there's a buff piece that's sitting behind that you want to get into, or maybe a juicier hero that's going to be dragged in from a piling perspective. So is that going to be such a big difference for Stormcast? And the reason we're talking IDK here is because it's important to understand what meta you're leading into. While LVO was great for you, the world is changing and it will continue to change. So, is spamming dragons the most viable option? If IDK rises, I think there's some very serious concerns you should be thinking about if you want to do well at a tournament.
Agreed. So the dragons do have the mobility to kind of get around the battlefield where they want to, but it's definitely going to make Ideneth Thievkin is going to make it very much harder to just step on the gas and go. So we've got our free shooting from the Draconis for one unit, but the Draconis, he doesn't get the free 12-inch pregame move. So chances are they can make sure you don't get that on turn one, and they can kind of guide what you may get it on later. But if you have to use your free double move just to get to a better target for your breath weapon, that's case the feel bads. It's not exactly an ideal situation.
Also with your coherency, having a 3-inch coherency, right? If you spread out across the board, and we see that a lot with the unit of 4, you might find that your closest target, you're actually splitting the attacks against 2, maybe even 3 units, depending on how much the board is compressed and where you are fighting over. So I think you'll find you're just not going to be able to put in those 4 breath attacks, and maybe even the support breath attacks if you went the extra 2 and 2, to be able to burninate those peasants. You're going to be splitting the attacks, and those dragon breath attacks are so swingy. If they spike, you're doing great. If they don't spike, you'll do like 1 mortal wound, and it's so hard to predict, and it's so hard to know what you're going to do.
Yeah, and if you're targeting Namarti and they happen to be near that nice tasty shipwreck for the feel no pain, well, then if you're splitting, it's 5-up ward, right? Save. Yeah. So if they happen to be sitting next to that, and then they're smart and like make little triangles out of their Namarti to control, you're exactly right, that 3-inch coherency. If you put 2 dragons into one 20-man brick, 2 dragons in another 20-man brick, and then they get a 5-up feel no pain, well, you might as well skip the shooting phase, because you might kill a couple and they're just going to bring them back.
Let's come back to Stormcast. I think we'll get to, but I think it's important. It was a really good discussion. I think it's important to be thinking about the upcoming meta, because IDK are popular, unlike Fire Slayers, where 1, there's not many Fire Slayers players out there. 2, I don't think a lot of people are going to go rush out and buy Fury of the Deep, so we don't have to worry too much. Yes, there'll be some hard lists, but certainly I wouldn't be thinking about them in the meta. Certainly IDK, there's a good chance that you'll fight one of your armies at a 5-game tournament as an IDK player. They are very popular. But talk to me about the play style. You kind of, the other conversation we were kind of leading towards is like when I play dragons, and whether it's a mixed dragon force and I just chuck in Krondus and Kazurai, whether I bring in just a unit of 4 Stormdrake Guard, or whether I go all the Stormdrake Guard. Was it Lord the Draconis plus 8?
The way
Is
I
it
was
8?
running, you can get an 11 dragon list if you do it right.
Yeah, it's
so I was
a
looking
10,
at
4,
Knight
2, 2.
Draconis 4222 or 42211 if you really want to be
Of
spicy
course.
about it.
Oh, no, you
and
can't
I
do
actually
1-1. Isn't 1-1? You can only have one if you've got a Lord Draconis, not Draconis.
yeah, you can include a single Stormdrake Guard, 1 unit of this type for each Knight Draconis you include in your army. So you could get just one, and then, I mean, you could throw in a Relictor just for some redeploy, you know, do something else with those points. And that also gives you another hero, because that was honestly, if we're circling back into playstyle, a lot of people were asking me about the assassin that I randomly threw into my LVO list, the 80-point assassin. And throwing a Relictor into a Dragon's list would serve almost the same purpose as that. There are certain missions in our packet that you can only, say, take objectives from your opponent if you have a character. Well, if you've just got one Knight Draconis, you might be in trouble trying to take stuff from other people. So just having that in was essential. But yeah, I like I honestly think pivoting a little bit play style wise into using dragons more as counter skirmish as opposed to alpha strike elements is going to be big in the coming meta. Like having a one-off dragon, just the one-man dragon squadron, just to use his once per game move to get in there and maybe throw himself at an essential support character and then, you know, die to the counter strike afterwards. Cool. We've traded. We've turned off some element in the other person's army that we need to, be it a War Chanta or a Thrall Master, whatever we're throwing him at. Generally, a one-man dragon squad will not punch up, but he is less valuable to our army than whatever support character we kill with him. So I think using those as you know, scalpels to take out key targets is going to be big coming up. But in terms of my list for LVO, it was like I said, hammers and anvils. The 3 dragon squadrons.
Hold.
Yep,
I'll bring up your list. I'll bring up your list soon. Let's not jump too deep into that.
Sure.
I want to get to the rules a little bit more, and we'll get to your list very soon. With the dragons and the way you play, how do you work around having so little models on the table? And I think that is a concern for people because you don't have a lot of things to screen with. Iron Jaws are becoming popular again, and they're rushing forward. When you make a mistake, whether you get into the wrong combat, whether you just lose something because someone attacks you and you die, you know, you don't have a lot of models to play with. And unlike Suns, where you might have 4 models on the table, they're quite forgiving with 35 wounds, while you really are only running around with 9 wound dragons. How do you play, or how do you think about your army knowing you've got so little wounds on the table and it's not forgiving?
Yes, that was a huge issue with the list. It is very high risk, high reward, and Iron Jaws, you're correct, are 100% a big challenge for sure. I played against one of the Seasons of War guys at LVO, and I probably spent more time in deployment measuring ranges, making sure I buffered out this. And I was very grateful to have the Griphounds and the Assassin for that, because in those matchups, that Assassin just stood out in the open, was a bubble of can't land here. That was its whole job. But you really are vulnerable to other Alpha Strike armies, and it feels a little bit like playing Rocket Tag, which is why for me it was very important that I get the list down to a 1-drop to give myself the best chance possible of going first. But any unit you lose is a quite measurable reduction in both your offensive and defensive output. So choosing your targets for a list like this is essential. If I get the first turn and I don't kill the things that can kill me back, that's I can just hand you the win right there. So it's about
can you
target
take
selection.
a punch? Like, can you take the punch with
the dragons?
with
Certainly
can.
List? Yeah, the dragons certainly can. Things like Iron Jaws hit particularly hard. I did have, like I said, I played one of the Seasons of War boys, and I had a unit of Gore Gruntas fail to kill 2 dragons. If your opponent, you know, doesn't roll hot, you can accidentally live it, and then you know they don't have the saves to really take the punch back. But it really comes down to being a surgeon. Like that Iron Jaws list, I had a big debate with myself as to whether or not to put the crossbows in reserve, because my opponent had the choice to go first or second. Do I leave them on the field and hope to take the charge, or do I put them in reserve and maybe spare them for, killing a war chanter later, coming down and hitting gore gruntas when they're vulnerable? So using each, knowing the exact capabilities, and not only I plan for failure. I try to give myself as many rerolls as possible, just because I know that my dice rolls are not going to go the best. I roll a lot of ones. So making sure that I use each unit as efficaciously as possible, trading up when I can. And then, that's pretty much it.
What about, and now I'm going to bring up the rules in a minute, but I want to talk Krondus and Kazurai. Where are they at when it comes to dragons? Do we take them? Do we like them? Too many points?
Krondus
and before we answer that, it's a competitive focused team. So if you want to run the big dragon, absolutely run the big dragon. I'm not saying don't run it, but if you're trying to make the most of it at a tournament, Cody, now tell me just the context. I don't want people feeling bad about running a big dragon.
Oh no, for sure. Dragons themselves. So first thing I'll say is that dragons themselves put magic in a weird spot. If I got put into, say, a Zine Harkness list, I would be all excited about that, because on a 4-up, we just ignore it. Hey, whatever. So given that dragons are such a prevalent force in the meta, I feel like that makes Krondus a little worse out the gate. In addition to that, there are a lot of armies out there that can make exemplary use of big magic casting, multiple casts, and I don't know if Stormcast are one of them. You and me talked a little bit about them potentially, Krondus at least, being a better fit in Cities of Sigmar. You've got an ocean of depth in terms of offensive, defensive spells and utility spells that you can use depending on what city you put them in. So I think Krondus definitely has a place in the meta. I haven't seen the list that makes the best use of him yet, but I definitely think it'd be a cities list. As far as Kazurai goes, I was having a discussion with a friend of mine about this the other day. He's 600 points, which at a brush feels like a lot. And I think when you do the math, you're trading offense for defense. So, you got a 4-stack of dragons. You got a 4-stack of dragons that are 680 points, I think it is. 340 times 2. Yeah, 680. And that's 36 wounds on a 3-up armor. If you're looking at Kazurai, it's 18 wounds on a 3-up armor for 80 fewer points. Now, having run headlong into a Maw Crusher that managed to pick off a couple of chaff units at a time and get some extra attacks, and then have him attack me with more attacks than my model had wounds in a different matchup, yes, I think Kazurai, if he gets to spiral, if he gets to maybe kill a key character here, kill a key character there, as he goes through, he will get very, very combat effective, and he is definitely a hammer into his own right. I think he definitely has a place in Stormcast lists, but I don't know if it's alongside other dragons. I think the points investment at that point is just too heavy.
Yeah, what I found, so I've been playing around with Krondus and Kazurai in Stormcast, and with Krondus, which is our wizardy dragon, one of the issues that I have is he does have a 3-up armor save, so you can certainly all out of defense or mystic shield, and you can get that down no problem. But there's no mortal wound save. There is no 6-up mortal wound. There is literally, it doesn't even have the ignore spells and endless spells on a 4-up. So what I found is I had to run a unit of Praetors, or I would run Gardas to support Krondus or Kazurai, just to keep have a bit of a ward buff. Now with Kazurai, which is the combat-y one, it's certainly harder to be running around with Praetors, because at least with Krondus, he doesn't have to be in combat. He's kind of trying to control the center of the board. So you can kind of advance up the board slowly, keep your Praetors within range, and be taking the hits and the damage from them. And maybe you have Emerald Life Swarm to keep Krondus alive. I certainly would agree to you. I've been running around with Cities of Sigmar in Living City and Hallow Heart, even Tempest Eye. Krondus does really well in cities as well, but he does need much more babysitting, which then brings you up from 600 points. Now you're in the 700, 800 point mark. Then with Kazurai, I'm more leaning now towards Kazurai. I want to run a big dragon. It's more of an armies on parade, but I also want to do well with it and have some lulls. And I think Kazurai of the two in a Storm Drake build is probably the one that matches more of the playstyle. You want to run forward, you want to smash face. It has some really good buffs, but it has only 18 wounds, no mortal wound save. I mean, it does heal a little bit if it kills chaff. If it's killing units with a wound characteristic of 2 or less, it's going to heal, but it's not a lot of healing. And with a lot of armies right now with a big power projection of just like damage, whether it's wounds or mortal wounds, they can lift Karazai pretty quickly. If my opponent has 6 long strikes, and you've got the Holy Command to be able to shoot in the hero phase, you could probably pull down Karazai, if not significantly wound it before the game started.
So I think I definitely agree with you 100%. Honestly, I think you'll probably get your wish here soon because I know this isn't an Idoneth podcast, but I think with Idoneth coming back in or coming into the forefront of the meta, I think we'll see the meta slow down a little bit. I think we'll see fewer of those Alpha Strike lists. I think we'll see more board control lists. So I think in those slower matchups, Karazai has a much bigger place because he can't Alpha Strike like your 4-man unit of dragons that can double move and launch himself. However, you can give your opponent turn 1 if they don't have a heavy shooting list, and he can darn sure peel somebody off a center objective. So I think you're probably going to get your list as the meta evolves to adapt to Idoneth Deepkin and Fire Slayers. I think we'll see a little bit slower, less Alpha Strikey meta on the horizon.
Yeah, and if it does slow down to what you're potentially predicting, Krondus I think is a great option. A wonderful spellcaster, has some very good control spells, whether it's the -1 to hit, reducing rend, subtracting from missile attacks, reducing armor saves. Like, there's so many cool things. He's got some good mortal wound attacks, good in combat, some nice casting benefits, and as I said, bring it in Emerald Life Swarm, and you'll keep Krondus on the table a lot, especially because he's getting like +3. Oh, he doesn't get on endless spells, but he gets like a whole bunch of boosts to cast. So
I think probably stealing a note from Gavin's book from LVO and running Living Cities. You save some points if you run Krondus as opposed to the 680 point brick of dragons. You still get the fulminators for the outflanking charge, and then you can control the middle of the board with Krondus or counterstrike with Kazurai or Karazai. I think you definitely have some. I think you definitely have some options there. Living Cities might be where Krondus wants to hang out.
Yeah, but we won't talk about those city folk. This is the Stormcast podcast. I'm a cities player. I'll talk till my face turns blue talking cities. But I want to talk a little bit about the allegiance abilities. Then we're going to go to your list, because we've talked a little bit about like where we think the dragons are and the pros and cons and the weaknesses and the strengths and what's coming up in the meta and how you're currently thinking. And we've kind of opened up Christmas presents a little bit to see that you've got an assassin in your list. And we'll talk a bit why. But before we get there, you've kind of got a couple of set of rules. So first off, we have ruined Christmas because we have got the Tempest Lord. So you have actively chosen not to be, and this one really surprised me, mate. This one really surprised me because when you often see Stormcast lists, they're usually either Hammers of Sigma or Hallowed Knights. I almost completely forgot it. It's literally the faction I'm running, and I almost forgot it. You're seeing a lot of Hammers and you're seeing a lot of Hallowed Knights, but with very little seeing Tempest Lords. So I guess a couple of things is like, why did you go Signs of the Storm over Stormkeep? What was it that it brought to the table? And then just Blaze of Glory come into play. And then I guess why Tempest Lords?
So remember earlier I said that I'm very bad at rolling dice. That definitely includes charges. And with such a low model count in the list, with so few models, I have to make sure that every single action I take is successful. And that includes not failing 3-inch charges by rolling double ones and having nothing I can say about it. If I can fail a charge, I'm going to. So the more rerolls I can give myself, the more abilities I can make sure to actually get my dragons on target. I need it. If for my playtesting, I found that the 6-up Feel No Pain wasn't quite as useful as making the charges and getting the damage I needed. We've all had that one crucial charge that just didn't happen. And if I can prevent that from happening as often as possible, I'm going to take it for sure. And then as far as blazing, or well, go ahead. You had a second part to your question. I'll let you repeat it.
No. It's a really good, like when I actually revisited what Tempest Lords did, it completely makes sense, right? Because you've got a lot of points tied up. Because again, funnily enough, last weekend I was running Kragnos, and part of the benefit and the allure to Kragnos is I get to roll 3d6 for the charge. And it's not that I want to do these long bomb 18-inch charges. It's just that consistency, especially because I've got so many points tied up in one model. You go in and you buff it, you do finest hour, whatever it is that you kind of apply to really boost up that round of combat. The worst thing that can happen is you fail the charge, you burn a reroll, and then nothing else can do another reroll. So being able to reroll one of those dice without spending a command point, it's incredible. Like that's a really good opportunity because it's not you're not re-rolling the whole roll, you're really rolling one of the dice.
Oh, for sure. It's so much better than just a straight reroll. Because if you roll a 6 and a 1, that's an average charge. You reroll it, you might get an average charge again. And if you need an 8, well, if you can just pick up that 1 and reroll that 1 instead of both dice, all the better. You've got such a higher probability of actually bombing that charge now, as opposed to just straight missing. I think it's very valuable for a unit, for an army that has as few units as I have, that has to make every action count.
And you're leaning in because it has to fly. So like your dragons are flying, so surprise.
Mm-hmm.
But things like fulminators and things like that who don't fly, you're not going to get that benefit. So I really like that in a Stormcast. What are you giving up by not going hammers or hallowed knights?
So a little bit of defensive potential. Well, for Hallowed Knights, a lot of bit of defensive potential. Those ward saves are very, very valuable, and I saw that. We'll talk about my game against James in a little bit, but I definitely I lose the ability to trade with other dragons as efficiently when they do have those defensive buffs, for sure. And that's what you give up. It's trading off a reliable offense for reasonable defense.
And I noticed that there was a few mirrors that were happening in the LVO, and what was standing out in the mirror match, the Hammers versus the Hallowed Knights, was that ward save and that consistent ward save from Hallowed Knights that was probably giving them that significant leg up in the mirror. So should dragons get incredibly popular and you're seeing lots of people running around with dragons, that could be a consideration for you because you wouldn't be able to use Gardas outside of Hallowed Knights. Hammers of Sigmar gives you that ward save of 6 up when you're within range of an objective. Bastion's cool if you want to run Bastion, but like you're really giving up the ward, right? And like, do you really want to be sitting dragons on top of objectives? Well, I guess it depends on where the fight is.
Yeah, that character giving out the 5-up Feel No Pain is 100% the edge. You're 100% correct in the counter matchup. Like if you're fighting dragons versus dragons, suddenly their Mortal Wound Breath is doing even less than it normally would, and you're effectively ignoring a third of their melee damage. And when you have, as we said, such limited resources to pull from, and you can just save a third more wounds for free, you're going to win that race.
One thing I noticed as well from my games is initially, because I was playing like I want to say a similar list. It wasn't the same list as you, but it had the same premise of like I wasn't going in all on dragons. I wanted to have some Vindictors and I wanted to have some other units as well as dragons. And initially I was playing with Stormkeep. And, you know, my Vindictors were sitting on objectives and all the great benefits. But one thing I noticed from playing Stormkeep with dragons was that I'm really reliant, or probably over-reliant, on the Lord Relictor. And especially because I had Gardas or being able to like get people within certain range of my buffs. And the dragons move so fast, it is hard to be in range of things like Mystic Shield and things like that. So I found much more success flipping out from the Stormkeep to Scions, so that when I've got Gardas, for example, I can drop him where I need to, as opposed to relying on translocation, having the artifact to re-roll it. And it's an easy target for your opponent to take out that Lord Relictor and you've lost some of that mobility and those buffs that you need, or you're out of range for them.
Yes, and that's something I borrowed heavily from my years with 40K, because 40K does very much have a rocket tag aspect to it. They've modified their boards a little bit these days, so where there's better line of sight blocking. But it used to be, go first, shoot the thing that's important, take it off the field. So I learned to protect those key pieces of the army. And anytime if I have a choice between having an army that can hide things in reserve until they're useful, or having to start them on the field, I'm going to lean towards being able to protect them, keep them in reserves, and make sure they can come down when they need to.
Well, let's talk your list. Let's actually bring up the list. So I've been teasing it a little bit, and so this is your list. You were Battle Regiment, right? It didn't come.
Yes.
It didn't come through. It didn't come through Battle Scribe for some reason when I was looking at the lists. But that's a whole nother thing with Battle Scribe. Use War Scroll Builder, kids. Use War Scroll
For
Builder.
sure. Yes, please do.
So you've got yourself. So you were obviously Signs of the Storm. You've gone Tempest Lord. You've gone Hold the Line as your grand strategy, and then your list becomes really interesting. You've got the Assassin, which is your Cities of Sigmar ally. You've got yourself the Knight Draconis, and it's all kitted out to the max, right? You've got the Celestial Instincts. You've got the Arcane Tome for Flaming Weapon, Master of Magic. So you have got your magic ability within the Knight Draconis, and then it's following along supporting your Stormdrake Guard. Speaking of which, you've got 3 units of Stormdrake Guard, all with Lancers, so none with swords. So I want to know why you went Lancers, not swords. Griphounds. I need to know why you've got Griphounds, because I love them. People have heard me talk about them. I used to run them a lot in first edition, but because you've got to take them in a block of 6 and of the coherency thing, like let me spread them out like 3s, let me like dragons, like let me spread them out, my doggos, and we'll be all good. But then you've also got your 6 long strikes, so having those raptors either in the backfield or coming down from the skies, all wrapped up in a tidy battle regiment. So I guess, what was the thinking here, and what were you trying to achieve with this list? Give me the rundown.
So we kind of discussed already that the point was to be able to get on target and take out the things that are most important early. The Vanguard Raptors, the long strike crossbows, able to fire twice, once per game, can be instrumental in softening up a hard target for a charge. Like if it's Gargants, obviously I'm going to put both volleys into the same Gargant before a unit or 2 of Stormdrake Guard hits it. They're really, really good at taking out characters. So in the just those Raptors by themselves warped every match, because they have to respect them. No matter what your opponent's running, unless you're INF, you have to respect those 6 Raptors with the long strike crossbows. My match against James, you should have seen the Tetris going on to make sure all of his dragons that were starting on the field could fit in the one corner I gave him outside of the crossbow range. I fought Longboard against Ironjaws, and everybody in that entire army was just as far in the back as they could go. Just because if you do get one of those War Chanters in range of a unit of Vanguard Raptors, well, suddenly you're not getting your 2 damage on your Gorgruntas anymore. So they're able to pick apart, with pinpoint accuracy, the pieces that make your opponent's army work. And from there, if it's just unit without buffs versus unit without buffs, generally the Stormdrake Guard are going to come out on top. Like you said, they're second best at everything, but if you don't have any buffs to put on your units, and I do, cool. The Griphounds were always instrumental in area denial. That was their entire job.
Talk to me about the Griphounds, because most people, if they had the points, they would go Liberators, they'd go Vindictors, they would go Judicators, they would go something, or even a support hero. They would find themselves at Lord Relictor, or what's the dude with the bow people are loving right now? I've forgotten his name.
Knight Judicator.
Yeah, they're not Judicator. Like people are going into that, or hell, you could even take like a Knight Azeroth who's running up the board, giving you that +1 bubble. So why the doggos? Why the good boys?
First of all, I love me some good boys. But second, honestly, area denial and warning cry. Being able to buff out from the Vanguard Raptors and have warning cry up. We have, in my local meta, we have a lot of people summoning demons. There's a lot of demons going around, and a lot of people who love their Annihilator spam lists. If I can make you drop outside of charge range of my Vanguard Raptors and also get a free shooting phase into you if I happen to be within 12 of 12 for the warning cry, more power to it. Because I haven't seen anything saying with warning cry that it's once per turn. The way the rule reads, whenever a unit is set up for the first time, you can fire. So if your opponent deep strikes 3 units of Annihilators, looks like to me you get 3 different shooting phases at 3 different units, which seems pretty punishing. So anytime you can give the main hammer in the army more chances to shoot is ideal. There were matchups I played where people had things in reserves or things they could summon where there is just an area of the board around those Griphounds, and I just shaped them kind of like a T-bone every game. There's an area around those Vanguard or around the Griphounds that they just cannot summon and cannot land if they're arriving from reserve for the first time. So having area denial like that is golden. Doesn't do anything for redeploy or picking things up and putting them back down. But as far as any army that wants to keep things in reserve and deep strike them on top of you, you really just can't do it in range of the Griphounds if they're near the Raptors.
And to Robert's point in the chat there, the core rules do limit us to having up to 2 shooting or combat attacks in a single phase. So if someone did three drop in from reserve, so if they drop 3 units of Annihilators, you'd only be able to do 2 of the 3 because you're only allowed to do shoot or attack twice.
Sure, fair enough.
That's one of the core rules. But I guess what you're hearing from the Warring Cry is that you can stack. So if they drop 2 units of Annihilators to then kind of charge you, you've got 2 triggers to shoot, which is incredible value, especially with. I mean, you have to shoot at whatever's charging, but it's so much better than an Unleash Hell.
For sure, and thank you for pointing out for the main rules, and kind of I clearly had that errant belief, and I'm glad somebody corrected it, and I'm glad for the format it was corrected in. But that was the power of the Griphounds, is that literally never came up. Nobody gave me a chance to do that. Nobody was willing to take the risk of dropping. Like the Griphounds just being there mean it's not going to happen. Nobody wants to take a free Vanguard Raptor shooting phase.
No, because you'll with the amount of mortal wounds that are triggered off the long strikes, there's a good chance you'll either delete or and because it's not just 1 unit that gets to shoot. You can pick up to 3 units that can shoot within 12. So if they happen to turn 1 try to alpha strike you, and you've got your dragons in range as well, you'll be able to apply those breath attacks as well as the long strikes. It's not just 1; it's up to 3 units that can shoot, which. As long as they're within 12, wholly within 12 inches of the doggos.
Yeah, it's a very cool ability, and it definitely helps create area denial in a list that doesn't have much screens.
Yeah, and I'm literally about to say that. Like, it's a good little unit that screens. It complements the shooting really well, but also if they die, you don't give away broken ranks. So it's a really good screen, and to your point, it's a good deterrent for someone that could do it. Probably is not going to want to do it anymore because 3 Annihilators dropping in, and that's just one of many examples that could do that. But they're probably more consistent, being that with the Lord Imperator, you can do the 7-inch re-rollable charge from Deep Strike. They'll delete the 3 Annihilators. Like, they've got no chance against the 6 long strikes being triggered by the Griphounds.
For sure. They're also just so cheap and really just aren't a threat by themselves, which is, the hallmark of a good screening unit, that with everything else in my list, people just didn't target them. They want to get to the Raptors. They want to get to the Stormdrake Guard. They want to kill my characters. So that means I've got 6 Griphounds floating around late game, just go cap an objective here, or maybe tie up a character, in the backfield if they can get there. They move at a pretty good clip, and people need to devote their firepower to the things that are more damaging the army, so they get away scot-free most games.
So talk to me about the dragons. So you've got your 3 units of 3. Sorry, 3 units of 2 Stormdrake Guards.
3.
First off, why no block of 4? I think that's probably what we see very commonly. Is you've got that block of 4, and it's that super easy target for all that attack or all that defense, the Nitrocotus buff, all that stuff. Why would you spread out your power against three units of 2?
Mostly, there were a couple of things that went into that decision. One, I needed battle line, and 2 units, a 2-man Stormdrake Guard unit is just a really solid all-around defensive profile in terms of battle line. We talked about them being anvils rather than hammers. So 340 points for 18 wounds behind a 3-up save is pretty good. They can accidentally overwatch fairly well if somebody charges in and you unleash hell on them. Yeah, there was one point at which I accidentally spiked like 11 damage on a flame attack when somebody charged me. Cool, spicy, I love it.
But I've also done it where it's done like 2 mortal wounds.
Yeah, or just nothing. Yeah, I've done it before. It's just there's the 1 and the 2. Cool, come on in. But 3 units of 2 gives me a lot of it's like we said, it's the high mobility. There's nowhere on the board that they can't reach, and having more units of them gives me more chances to steal objectives from other people who might only have a few models on this objectives over here. Because remember, they are still monsters. So the faster they go and the further they go and the more they can spread out, the better they are. I like running them in the minimum units because it also means your opponent has to make more decisions.
Yes.
Because if you give somebody a 4-man brick, you've given them a good target. And yes, you can all-out defense, you can cast Mystic Shield on it, but if they've got mortal wound output or if they've got heavy hitters, all of it's going into the 680 points you just served them on a platter. So a list like this makes your opponent make more decisions, and the more decisions they make, the better the chance they'll make a bad one.
Yeah, 100%. And that's probably, I really wanted you to call that out because the Unity 4 is really tempting, but then it gives you your opponent that easy target to go, right, well, I clearly know all the buffs are going to go here. The combat is likely to follow this particular unit because it has the Lancers, it's a unit of 4. That's where you're going to do the damage. And the unit of 4 is going to do incredible damage between the shooting and the combat phase. But when you've got 3 units of 2, it's really hard to know where the combat's going to be. You can swing them to all support each other, or you can spread them out and have wherever the fight needs to be. So, but why no swords? I think people love the lances, and it's obviously great for the charge. But I've also seen discussions around the swords, and I guess it depends on the grind versus do I want to do damage, up front. But where are you at? Why all 3? I've just seen a lot of people mix it up and have like a bit of this and a bit of that.
I have 2. Bear in mind with the list I'm using them as anvils rather than hammers. The whole point of being 1 drop is to get in my opponent's face with the Stormdrake Guard as fast as possible and pin them in their deployment zone to keep them from getting to the Vanguard Raptors. And the lances give me that little extra AP or that little extra rend on the chart. I keep going back to 40k.
It's all good. It's all good. We know where you're going.
It gives me that little extra rend on the charge, and I just can't intellectually get my head around running something rend 1 when all-out defense is a thing to just ignore it. I always want to have some kind of advantage over my opponent's defenses, and that's where I think the lances took it for me. Is just if I'm going to be in my opponent's face and I'm going to be charging turn 1 anyway, my objective is to take as much off the field on turn 1 as I can, and that means getting around defenses, especially if I'm alpha striking, getting around, like my opponent won't have the chance to cast Mystic Shield or to put on their defensive buffs, which means all they've really got for my turn 1 charges is all-out defense. And I get around that with Ren 2 a little bit better.
Yeah. The challenge obviously is going to be if you don't delete or do the damage that you need to do, and you're stuck there with the grind, those lancers are only 3 attacks, 3s, Ren 1 for 1. So you do really good damage on the charge, but once you do that, then if you're stuck in the grind, and I guess the key to this is try to avoid the grind. Try to do as much damage as possible, pick your targets and get into what you need to and know exactly what your damage capabilities are. And because if you're stuck in the grind, 3 attacks is not going to get you out after the charge.
Right. I definitely agree with you. They're not good at prolonged combat by any means. However, they are really good at just being in combat while long strikes take out other targets. And once they're in there, the long strikes are there to kill the targets that I need dead. Once the drakes are in there, their job is to hold people. Their job is not at that point to kill anything. I've done more work with just Stormdrake Guard taking a turn of combat and then falling back with the one remaining guy on 3 onto an objective somewhere and making them chase him while I get another turn with the Raptors just because the Stormdrake Guard are pinning something. Like I'll tag as many targets that can't reasonably kill the guard back as I can and just let them fight. If I lose a dragon here, I lose a dragon there, fine. But as long as they're holding people in place, they're doing their job.
And if you've got a unit of 2 and you do lose one is still a significant threat. So you don't have to worry too much because 1 can still work. How do you play with the coherency? Do you have them spread out within 3? And I think, again, that's one of the benefits of having a unit of 4 is the amount of board dominance you can have by having, 1 3-inch, 1 3-inch, and you can really spread out across the board. It also means it's susceptible to being able to be pinned or to be stuck in combat and you can't get out because only one of them or 2 of them are in combat actually fighting. So, yeah, talk to me about your coherency and how you play around with it.
Sure. So the 3-inch coherency definitely can let you tag, as I said, as many targets as you can. Those bases are some big ovals, and the ability to have them 3 inches apart means I can tie up more units. I can use that extra reach to grab another 10-man squad that might have been able to run onto that objective and take it from me. But just that's mainly what I use it for, is keeping the coherency while I fight in 2 different directions. I've also used it with the way the ovals are shaped and the 3 inches behind to exclude a character from combat that I didn't want to drag into engagement range and fight his friends on either side. That 3-inch engagement range, or the 3-inch coherency rule for them, just it does. You're absolutely correct. It gives you so much to work with in terms of your movement and positioning. The match I played against the gentleman from Seasons of War up in Canada, he had that big orc war chief that had the destroyer axe, and I really didn't want to tag him. So I charged a unit of Gorgruntas, and I tagged Gorgruntas on one side, the Grots he had on the other side, and that guy just got to sit in the middle and stare at both because he was just barely out of range of both.
Was that Carl?
I think so.
It wouldn't have been Jordan, and certainly
I think it was Carl. Yeah.
It must have been Carl. Cool.
Yes.
And I think it's good, but it also is a trap that you can fall into coherency and you can get brought into combat. And if you, especially got a unit of 4, you could get tied up pretty easily if you're not being careful of where you're moving and piling in the combats, because all it takes is one model to pin one dragon, and that big Congo line of your unit of 4 are pinned. And it's not like you can pile in and try to get out of a deep combat. You're stuck. So you're going to have to retreat. So, keep that in mind, I guess. Brent asked, have we ever tried lists with artillery? My honest answer is I can't justify our Stormcast artillery. I love the idea, don't get me wrong, but it's almost like if I'm going to add something a bit spicy, I'm probably going to go with the chariot instead of the artillery. I can't justify it. Like I'd rather judicators, I'd rather prosecutors than artillery. And I'm not trying to bag you up, Brent, but I look at that war scroll and I'm like, I can't justify you. And to Stormkeep's point, the Knight Judicator, when you look at that model, there's a reason why that particular model is in a lot of lists, because it is probably doing the role of artillery, but better.
I agree with you. It's hard for me to choose one of the ballistas when I have access to Vanguard Raptors with sniper crossbows. And I hate to admit that Rule of Cool has bled into my list building a little bit, but let's be honest, what's cooler, an artillery piece in the backboard or throwing a couple of extra dragons at somebody? Like it feels more fun. It feels better on the tabletop. At least for me, like the aesthetic of just dragons charging across the field is just so cool. And yeah, I think the crossbow or the artillery pieces had their day in the sun. They were pretty good. Last book for Stormcast, they put in some good work. We got to remember at the end of the day, Games Workshop is a model selling company, and if they make the stuff that was good last edition good this edition, well, nobody's buying the new stuff they're coming out with. So I think that lends in too.
Yeah, if I think about the artillery piece and then probably the buffs it's going to need, and they're probably going to need a what's it called, the Ordinator, the Lord Ordinator. I'm going to need the Lord
Yes.
Ordinator to buff it as well. If I'm going to bring in a Lord Ordinator, I'm probably going to need a second artillery piece to at least justify the costs. Between the two plus the hero, I don't know the actual real maths, but I'm guessing it's around 500 points, give or take. So, again, am I better off having 2 Knight Adjudicators or a unit of Raptors or something else? I think we've already answered the question, but not to say don't run it, but I think I think the challenge right now is, points are up, board sizes are down. You really need to look into getting the most out of your points. And it's partially why Battle Line If and unlocking Battle Line is so incredible value. When you look at the fact that if you didn't unlock the Stormdrake Guard, and let's say that Knight Draconis wasn't the general, then you need to fit in at least 3 units of Liberators into this list, or 3 units of Vindictors. And all of a sudden, your power projection and the list that you want to create is fundamentally different.
I agree. I very much like units that can operate without support, and Stormdrake Guard very much can. Vanguard Raptors very much can. Anytime you have to start taking taxes to support units, that's the unit more expensive. You were talking about the unit of Praetors running with Krondus. Well, suddenly Krondus is what, 765? The unit of Praetors is 165. So him going from 600 blank to now we have to support him to keep him alive for 765, and if we want to buff him anymore, it's more. Anytime you can get around taxes, that's great. And you're right, unlocking Stormdrake Guard as battle line means I don't have to waste points on Liberators or small units. I can run the units that operate without other support, that function well independently. As we were talking about earlier, like the Vanguard Raptors in the list to remove those pieces of support from other people's lists so they function worse. Well, if my units function without support just fine and yours don't, once the support's dead, the game's going to fall out how it falls. So I definitely like avoiding tax units, and that includes anytime I have to take 3 or 4 other units to make 1 unit good.
Nobody likes paying taxes. And
Yeah.
to what Stormkeep said in the chat, I think it's a really good call out, and I will shout it out. And I want to get your thoughts on James O'Brien's list in a minute, but I also do want to just understand your Knight Draconis options, right? So Stormkeep said, spamming ballistas isn't very good, and the Ordinator is expensive. True, we've established that. But part of the call out I wanted to make was adding 1 ballista to the list with a Taurolon, which is really good right now. The Taurolon has become hot in the current game. With the Ren 3 shooting attack is hot. And yeah, I would agree with that one. That's one little cheeky threat that no one's going to be targeting. Good option. Would I go multiple? Hells to the no.
Agreed.
But is it better than a Knight Judicator? I'll leave you to be the judge. But now you can tell me, Cody, why would you go Celestial Instincts? Why would you go the Arcane Tome as your only artifact option? Why would you try to bring spellcasting to this list?
So the Knight Draconis is my one predominant character. The Assassin is just gravy. Celestial Instincts was the best of the mount traits, honestly. If we're keeping it candid, I don't think the mount traits for Stormcasts are particularly good overall. So Celestial Instincts was the one that I thought I might be able to get some use out of. The others didn't really thematically fit with the list. They didn't functionally fit with the list, so it was the one I could go with. As far as Arcane Tome, it was Flaming Weapon. The ability to cast Flaming Weapon on himself or cast Mystic Shield on one of those units of Drakes that I'm about to launch across the field. Remember, the Drakes in my list, their entire purpose is to tie somebody up. So if I can put one in your face with Mystic Shield, all out defense another one, I've got 2 units of dragons, 18 wounds, 2 up armor that you have to get through before you can go out and touch objectives. So turn 1, his ability to increase the defenses on the dragons, and the turns after that, the subsequent turns, being able to turn on Flaming Weapon. Flaming Weapon lets the Knight Draconis punch way outside his weight class. There's not a whole lot in the game that's not intimidated by a best day ever Titanic Duel all out attack, Flaming Weapon, Knight Draconis just breathing down their neck. He's a beat stick in his own right, and Arcane Tone Flaming Weapon just makes him so much better.
Yeah, and if you always need the defensive prowess, you've also got the Mystic Shield. You can do an Arcane Bolt if you need to. There's a couple of good little options out there giving you magic, because you're right. Without the Arcane Tome, there's some good artifacts, if you don't want to dip into the Arcane Tome, but you do lose playing in a phase because you have no other magic options. So you either need to bring in like a battle mage, you need to bring in some type of magic caster from your own lists, or you can do it instinctively to the Knight Draconis with the artifact choice. So, and I think that's probably one thing I noticed when I was playing that Stormcast build, was that if I have a foot troop wizard, because I don't have a lot of points to spend on other wizards, it's quite hard to keep within buff range. While if you put it on your Knight Draconis, he's following you around. He's got the speed to be keeping up with the Stormdrake Guard. So you're always going to be in the buff ranges to be able to put what you need to be putting on when you need it.
For sure. And he's never really in as much danger as people think he is. I mean, he's still, double-digit wounds, 3-up armor, and then if your opponent looks like they're going to threaten him in a turn, you can generally see from the board setup whether he's vulnerable and going to take a charge. You always have Finest Hour. You can Finest Hour him, and then he can. There's stuff can kill him, but he can take a lot of punishment at that point.
What about the assassin? What's the role of the assassin? Like what can they do?
The assassin is in there, as I said. Predominantly, I'm going to be honest. I had 100 points left, or I had 90 points left, and the assassin was 80 of them. It took up a good spot because there's not a whole lot else in the Stormcast Codex that I wanted. A unit of Aether Wings maybe could have come in handy to pair with the Vanguard Raptors, so I didn't have to all-out attack them. But honestly, having the extra character was very, very useful. There ended up not being any missions at LVO that keyed off characters holding objectives, but that was the thought. But that assassin also can just be area denial for 80 points. Like oftentimes you'd see the Griphounds and the Vanguard Raptors on one side of my deployment and the assassin on the other, just creating a bubble of you can't teleport or deep strike in this area. She's great for hiding behind ruins or terrain and then ducking out and grabbing an objective right quick. And she is not a slouch in combat. If somebody's just holding an objective with a couple of little units or a 5-man squad of this, 5-man squad of that, she can get in there and actually put out some damage.
I was just looking at the rules. I just want to check something, because one of the hidden benefits is going to be literally being able to hide the assassin, but you wouldn't get that benefit because it needs to be a Cities of Sigmar unit with 5 or more models. I was trying to see, could you hide the assassin in the Vanguard Raptors or the Griphounds? No. And the answer would be no. So the assassin is on the table, not hiding, not coming from Signs of the Storm. It's walking up the board.
Correct. Yeah, but you auto runner, she can get around the board pretty quick. I very much wished that she could be hidden in the Griphounds unit. I even had a fun little idea for a conversion. Unfortunately, that's not legal. But I had an extra Griphound head, and I was going to do like a cloak of feathers, and just blending in. But no, she doesn't benefit from really any of the special rules that she has access to. She's just an 80-point mini beat stick. She'll kill mage characters without really getting killed back. Those little, dinky support characters. She's good for chipping away at the last couple of wounds on something here or there. Just general utility, honestly.
Yes, you've got it there as an extra hero for those, because you're right, probably especially for those tournaments that don't announce their missions in advance. You need that extra hero, because if you happen to play that particular battle plan and you've only got one hero, which is that Knight Draconis, the minute you lose that, you don't have a lot of options, especially if you do come up against a turn 1 Alpha Strike battle regiment style build who can project power like you. You've lost your ability to score. So good thoughts. Anything else you'd want to mention about this list, or should I go into the James O'Brien list? And obviously, it's, probably other people have run lists like it, but it's just the alternative, I guess, of going all in.
Yeah, I think if I was going to make one change to this list in the future, obviously I'm, with respect to the new books coming out, I'll be making quite a few changes on the horizon. But I think I do tag out the Assassin for Aether Wings. It leaves me with one less character, but it does give me that extra fly around unit to just grab objectives later. They're faster than the assassin is. And they, if they're accidentally within crossbow range, the Vanguard Raptors within 12 inches of something, Vanguard Raptors would get their benefit, which is always nice. Unfortunately, I lose 1 drop at that point, so there's a whole slew of other considerations that go into that, because that takes me to 6 unit choices. But, the assassin was good. She was probably the best use of that 90 points I could have had, given the books that I was pulling from. But, there's definitely other things to consider, and I'd probably go a different direction in the future.
And I guess if you drop the assassin, you could go for the triumph. Absolutely. Get yourself Aether Wings, get yourself endless spells. There's a lot of cool things you could possibly do with it, but you're right. Then you'd lose the battle regiment. So, what before I move into the other list, what would happen to your list if you lost battle regiment? So if you went warlord or some other option, how important is going 1 drop for yourself?
For this list, very important. This list wants to Alpha Strike, and it cannot particularly take 1. My Orcs player let me go first. Or my Urlik War Clans player let me go first. I was lucky enough to win the roll-off against James, so I got to go first there. But I really don't want to get just crippled turn 1. Like we said, I don't have a whole lot of spare parts to play with, so to speak. Every unit I lose, every unit that gets weakened is a measurable reduction in my offensive capacity, especially the Vanguard Raptors. So going first for this list in the environment of other alpha striking dragon armies was imperative to stay competitive. There was just no way a 2-drop was going to cut it in a land of 1-drops.
Would you put things like your Vanguard Raptors into reserve if you found yourself in a situation where it's 1 drop? You were concerned that someone is going to get you first or has the ability to go first. Would you put some of these things into the sky?
I actually the entire reason I didn't go Stormkeep was so I could protect those Vanguard Raptors by putting them into the sky. And I did play a Lumineth matchup where my opponent won the roll-off. He was going to get the choice was to go first or second. And I null deployed a unit of Stormdrake Guard and the Vanguard Raptors, and just everything else was in a corner. And my opponent, he told me that was part of the thing that made him go second. He gave me first turn was the Vanguard Raptors weren't on the field. They weren't going to get their double shots on turn 1. And it's not what I want. I want to go first, but keeping them safe is better than losing their shooting altogether.
Correct. I guess the challenge with you putting them into reserve, and even just the challenge in general, is because you've only got really 1 hero, the Holy Command is going to require you to be in range of that Night Lord or Draconis model. So if you put them into reserve, you're still going to need the Knight Draconis to be in range to be able to apply the Holy Command, the Thunderstrike, and the Thunderbolt Volley. So they can't self-buff, right? So, it's going to be good for getting around things like the Forgotten Nightmares. Like if you do play IDK, you can at least drop them where you want to be shooting. But you're going to need a support piece. If this becomes the meta and the gatekeeper into, winning a game, you're going to need a support hero that's going to come down with the Vanguard Raptors to ensure they get to use the Holy Command. But even then, the Holy Command happens in the hero phase, and you drop down in the movement phase. So you're really hoping for the double turn.
The double turn is nice, but yeah, you're 100% correct. It takes a little bit of pre-planning and forethought into where you want to be going. Not this turn, but the one after it.
Yeah, and you're obviously hoping for the double turn, right? Like you can't guarantee it.
Always.
Can't guarantee it. So, like, am I going to put my my models out in the wind and hope for the best? Probably not. So, pros and cons. But I think it's a great list, and I think it's a great option. And whether you go, some people might go, as you said, put down some Aether Wings, get some Liberators. You might reinvest the doggos into getting a different support hero. That Knight Judicator, for example, could be a good option. But then you lose the Rousing Warcry. I guess it depends on how much models coming in from reserve is in your meta and how big of an issue it could be. But I think what you shared was a really cool option and certainly a good basis for people who might want to run some dragons. They don't want to buy all the dragons. They might want to bring in a little bit. Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
this is James's list, and this is probably I'm bringing this up because it's a more common list just seeing in the game. This is I don't think James created it. It's just someone I saw and done really well. So I'm not like trademarking it to James, but what you're seeing here is a couple of it's certainly all in on those Stormdrake guards. So you've got the unit of 6 Stormdrake guard. You've got 2 units of 2, and then a unit of 4. You've still got your Knight Draconis, but you've got your Lord Castellan, and you've also got Gardas as well. Still 1-drops. Ignore the 4-drops. I'm a potato. It's a 1-drop list. Editing, quick editing. That was from my site. Literally the discussion last week from Sons. I forgot to edit it. But talk to me about this type of list. Like, what do you gain and what do you lose from a list like this?
So, I really like James' list. It's very strong. Obviously, it beat me. But I really like this list because it is, number one, it's 1-drop, so it's still able to Alpha Strike. The Castellan and Gardas can stay in reserves, so it can Alpha Strike and bring its character support with it. Like, honestly, you'll just start the Castellan on the backboard, buff the guard, launch everything across the field, which is exactly what James did. However, it also has a lot more play involving Gardas at counteracting the other dragon lists. Like this in the mirror match, having Gardas in the list gives you an advantage big time. You get to negate a bunch of their shooting, which is all mortal wounds. You get to negate a bunch of their damage. And just honestly, dragon on dragon, this list is going to win that slugfest. And you see he's got the Warblades, so he is planning on that protracted engagement. And just over time, this list will wear its opponent down faster than its opponent will wear it down. And that's exactly what happened with us. Honestly, in our first round of combat against James, I don't think James killed a single dragon, even though I was in combat with him on my turn 1. But over the course of the game and over the course of the turns, his dragons were more durable than mine. Mine started going down faster than his started going down, to the point where he had more than half of his left on the field, I think, at the end of the game, and all of mine were dead. So it's just in that prolonged, protracted, just slugfest, this one has more defense, and that very much came into play in our match.
Do you remember what he did with the Lord Castellan? I'm assuming he's applying the +1 to the saves of 1 unit, and it's quite a generous 18-inch kind of range to be able to apply the warding lantern. Or was he going for more of the other role with the D3 damage?
Oh, it was 100% buff the Drakes. I can give you the play-by-play of that match. I remembered every moment of it. We kind of talked it out. James was a great guy. I very much hope I get to play him again. He was an absolute gentleman. One of my favorite upper echelon opponents I've played in Age of Sigmar. But we rolled off for it. I got the ability to choose whether to go first or not. So he castled up most of his dragons in reserve. He had two dragons, or he had most of his dragons in a corner. I dropped my my big crossbow unit on one side of the field to try and preclude him from controlling that half of the board. I was lucky enough to have a garrisonable ruin that conferred the 6-up Feel No Pain from mysterious terrain that I was planning on castling them up in. So I stationed them near that and still left them out in the open, so they had a wide field of fire. He put all of his dragons in the very back corner of the map, kept some stuff in reserve, including Gardas, and I took first turn. And we kind of looked at each other. I was like, all right, well, let's see if I can do the damage. I launched all my dragons across the field, engaged. I think I killed 2 from his 4-man, 1 from one of his 2-mans, so we had 3 dragons down out of the list. He punched back, didn't kill any of my dragons. But what he did do was successfully prevent me from ever getting to use Thunderbolt Volley. I never got to fire the crossbows twice. He was just out of range from the word go. I had to keep, it was part of the problem, because I had to keep, as we were saying, the Knight Draconis back within range of the crossbows to have the potential to Thunderbolt Volley in the future. So I couldn't even be as aggressive with the Draconis as I would have normally liked to. And then me and him kind of looked at each other. We talked it out, and he had some really rough rolls. Like, I remember I had a dragon on 1 wound in his shooting phase, and he rolled 3 different dragons worth of shooting into it and got the 1 or the 2 every single time. So I was feeling pretty good about that because he had chosen to try and kill that unit as his kill a battle line, and I was just giddy. And me and him kind of looked at each other, and he's like, I think whoever wins this roll off wins the round. And I looked at the board and I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. And we rolled off for it, and he got a 6, I got a 1, and I kind of looked at him and I was like, well, that's definitive. So then he was able to get another turn, a second consecutive turn of breath weapons back into my dragons in close combat. And he aimed for it. It was good play on his part. He dropped one of his units of dragons on turn 1 and didn't really do anything with it, just aiming to hop over my skirmish screens and charge into those Vanguard Raptors on turn 2 if he got the turn 2. So it was we both acknowledged that it was kind of an all-in situation. Like either he was going to get the turn, kill the crossbows, or the crossbows were going to come online and just start clearing dragons. He won the roll off, and that was the game, man. I think I got tabled at the end of 3 or beginning of 4. So it was a good game. It was a very tight game.
Yeah, no, I dig it. And I think what I really learned from that, or at least enjoyable, is to hear how these play out. And I guess one thing that's going to work really well in an all dragons list is what you do really well. But when you start coming up against certain lists, and I think, there will be counter plays coming up. And, like I almost, at the tournament that I just came from last week, I almost ran 160 grots. Because I think one of the things that's going to pop up pretty soon is a horde meta, or at least people are going to be looking. And I know I talked to Gavin, who won the LVO, and Gav was talking to me about the durability and being able to sustain damage. So whether it is something like Nurgle that can just have an industrial amount of like ward saves and healing, or you something like Soulblight Gravelords. I played a game against 60 zombies the other day, right? Just a huge amount of wounds that have a good ward save that can heal itself up, or you just throw cheap bodies. Like if you had six long strikes at my 160 grots, I don't care. Shoot my full wound hero, I don't care. Like I've still got 160 wounds on an objective. And for the dragons, yeah, you do a bunch of mortal wounds, but is it enough to pull down 160 grots? And I've got like a -1, to hit net around as well. Like, you know what I mean? So there is a bit of a counter probably coming, but we're already seeing it through IDK with the Forgotten Nightmares, and we'll see more of that come out. Who knows what happens when Nighthaunt drops pretty soon, right? We'll have to have Ignoring Rend as well. So a lot of things will come up in the game that'll make us change. And I think one thing that I really like about yours is you could adjust and keep the core of the dragons if that's what you really want to play, but then flip out some other meta options. And maybe if deep striking kind of drops, pull out the Griphounds. You can pull back on the Assassin, pull out on different models and interchange it with maybe it's Judicators. Maybe you need more volume of attacks. Maybe the Chariot is actually a great option now. You know what I mean? Like you can interchange.
For sure. And I definitely think hordes are a pretty solid counter to the Oops All Dragons list.
And Beasts of Chaos are coming, my friend. Beasts of Chaos. That
totem is so cool.
That white dwarf is once those people dust off their models and they turn them from square bases to round bases, be scared of the Beasts of Chaos. But between them and our Gloomspite Gits, I think a meta counter will come, and it'll be hard for you to chew through. So many wounds.
So I think I honestly think the death list that I was running prior to switching into Stormcast Eternals would give the Oops All Dragons list fits, because that list was running 40 direwolves and 80 zombies. It topped out if I got, I had a Gargant in it as well, just for the Ren 3, but it topped out if you killed everything and I got to bring everything back at over 300 wounds. It's a DPS check for sure. And dragons are great at killing high value, good armor targets, but they're not good at killing 80 zombies. It's just a lot to chew on.
Well, we saw Levan, who went to the finals of the LVO, had 2 units of 60 zombies plus a Mega Gargant. So just having an industrial amount of wounds that can heal up, that have the gravesite wards, all of these things, like it's a lot of bodies and a lot of things. And I think it is one of the natural counters to this scalpel, mortal wound, pick off the heroes, because they don't care about the heroes. Cool, just flood the board with a bunch of necromancers. Okay, target the necromancers. I've still got a couple left.
True. Yeah. And I think scaling back from the big unit of 6 crossbows, especially with Idneth coming in and neutering shooting already, I think 3 crossbows is enough to, or a 3-man squad of crossbows enough to pick off a necromancer or a vampire that's, passing out buffs. They're not going to do the same kind of terror work they do against, a big unit of gore gruntas that just doesn't want to take the shots, but they can still serve that scalpel purpose without soaking up so many points that you can't put in some horde clearance units. And Stormcast definitely do have some units that are very, very good at clearing hordes. So maybe that's the trade-out we make, is to make sure we've got another piece in the toolkit tailored towards helping us with that matchup, for sure.
So wrapping things up a little, like what were the keys to your success? Like if I'm going to run dragons, whether it is all dragons, whether it's some dragons, like what were the keys to your success? And maybe I've got one more question that's burning that I've got to ask. Crossbows of the future. People look, and you know what? Like Matt from Team Canada has made a really good call as well. Like dragons are so good outside of Stormcast. Like Hello Heart Krondus makes me drool. Like just wizardy Krondus in Stormcast. Please don't change Coalition because they do incredibly well. People are just like obsessing with crossbows in the chat. Like, oh, there's crossbows. Everyone's having a crossbow party. But back to you. What were the keys to your success?
So an understanding of the meta, honestly. I had to know what I was going to be fighting. I went over list after list after list. Like the plane ride to LVO was just scrolling through, check the next list, look through it. And then I'm still fairly new to Age of Sigmar. I got my first brush actually at the Invitational out in Texas, where one of the fine gentlemen from the Harambe's Heroes from out in Texas introduced me in the most violent way possible to what Gore Gruntas do. I think I was tabled on 3 with that, massive zombies and direwolves list. But I didn't know what the list did. And then once I learned it, once I figured out which pieces make it work, then you learn what you need to focus on. So choosing your targets, choosing your battles, knowing what you can engage, what you need to stay away from is key to running an elite army like this. Knowing what those crossbows need to draw a bead on to keep you in the game versus what you're just going to be wasting shots into. And that made all the difference. Like I made one mistake one turn of putting the crossbows into a group of Lumineth Sentinels, a 30-man squad of Lumineth Sentinels. And with all the ways he had to rally an Emerald Life Swarm and get them back.
Protection of Hirsch, you got the 5-up ward, then they got the Emerald Life Swarm to bring back D6, double tap it. It could be.
I literally could have, I just wasted a turn of shooting because every model I killed, he had back the next turn. And that's a mistake I won't make again. I'll focus something else. The next turn I focused on the foxes he had, and the crossbows per shooting phase picked up a fox. Cool. That's, 300 some odd points per shot I fire. That's just mine. I just that far ahead. So knowing what you can get away with shooting, what you can't get away with shooting, and knowing where your pieces are best served, knowing your matchups. That's the big one.
How did you learn? Because it's important. First off, I tell people learn your army before you learn the meta, right? Because I do see a lot of people chopping and changing their lists and trying to find this optimum build. And in that pursuit of the optimum build, they don't practice nearly enough and they don't know their army as well and the potential and what they do in certain. Like I'll stress test my army all the time. Like what happens if I lose this key piece? What happens if I don't have all that attack? What happens if this happens and I'm down? Like what is the capability of my force? But once you kind of got a good understanding of what your army does and you've tested it out a fair bit, you then try to learn other people's armies. And there are so many different armies and there are so many different variants. And it's not like 40K, where 40K, and again, I'm not throwing shade over the fence, but 40K does have those dominant runaway builds in every codex. And you quickly see, there's always these terrorizing factions. But in AOS, it seems like there's always like five factions that do well, but it's not necessarily one build. So I guess my question to you is, how did you go about learning about the other armies? Did you worry about every army under the sun? How did you do it?
So I am in a lot of different chats. We've got a couple of chats in Florida. We got our boys with Battle Ready Wargaming who do some playing. But honestly, we started out with just Friday night whiskey and Warhammer nights, where I just invite all of our friends, the people we know who play Age of Sigmar, just grab an army, bring a 6-pack, and just come over and we just play games. And sometimes we're up till like 2-3 in the morning on a Saturday, just from noon till 2:30. Just cool. Beast of Chaos, never fought them. Hop on the tabletop. And the first couple of times I try into a new army or a new list, I want to know what the worst outcome is, so I don't have them tell me what the tricks are. I let them happen to me. That way it never happens again. I know what to watch out for. I know what people are setting up for. And then just, if you are unfamiliar with the meta, there are a couple of questions that I always ask my opponents at the beginning of my rounds. Do you have any way to redeploy your units? Do you have any way to run and shoot, fall back and shoot? Do you have any way to leave combat for free? Just kind of stuff like that. Do you have any way to bodyguard characters to, get wounds off that I might put on your characters? And just asking those questions. And even if you're completely blank on your army, just asking what those tricks might be. Your opponent doesn't have an obligation to walk through their list and say every little gotcha they've got. But if you ask those questions, most people, that's something I've really liked about this community, is that most people are gentlemen. If you ask what the list does, you ask them to explain it, they'll tell you. If you ask what the tricks are, do you have any way to redeploy? Nobody's going to lie to you and gotcha later. It's not going to happen. So just asking those questions up front and getting a fairly clear understanding of where the buffs are coming from, who's doing what, and then making your decisions from there. Asking those questions up front is life or death.
The key to it is, and I agree with you, the key to it is asking the right questions. This time last year, if anyone wants to know what type of questions to ask, go back. I've actually got a video on like top 6 questions that I ask every opponent. The key is to ask the right questions. And, it could be how many drops. It could be, can you run and charge? Because it might determine if you give away first turn, or, you give away, like what's the threat ranges? Like how far can you move, shoot, charge, all of those things, right? Do you get any pluses to the cast? Like whatever, and it's going to change depending on the armies and depending on the situations. And in your case, you want to know where and how you make the most of your long strikes or things like that. But asking the right questions is absolutely critical. To Matt's point as well, in the chat, if you know your army really well, you'll get a couple of wins. You'll get into analysis paralysis if you try to understand how to counter Deepkin and Storm, and then the mirror matchup, and then you play Zinj, and then you play like all these different factions, because the way you respond to one army is going to be different to another, and you can't have all the answers in one list, because just don't have the points, and it just means you be the jack of all trades, the master of none. There's been tournaments where I've played all of the hot meta armies. There's been tournaments where I played none of them. Some of them I've played multiple times, one faction multiple times at a tournament. You just don't know how the cookie is going to crumble.
For sure. I think a big one these days is what ways do you have to get models back? Like how can you recur models? That's a huge one these days. Because I've watched it happen where somebody had a 6-man unit of dragons down to 1 dragon, and they pressed the rally button and rolled 3 6s, and man, that's a case of the feel bads.
Yeah. Can they ally Fire Slayers? Imagine the 4-up bring back a dragon.
I'm so glad they came out and said that's not going to be a thing. Don't worry about it. Like immediately, everybody's like, you know what you're doing. Sit back down.
Yeah, well, when I looked at the battle tome, for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, in the Fire Slayers, there's one of the little heroes that does rally. They do rally on a 4-up, and I think Stormcast is one of the few people that can ally Fire Slayers. So it means that you could be rallying a dragon on a 4-up, but you can't do it because it's not keyworded, but it needs to be FAQ'd. So don't go and run buy that Rune Master or whoever it is that's doing it. You're wasting a couple of dollars.
Yeah, the internet went crazy for a couple of days on that, and then they came out with it's not going to be that way. Don't worry about it.
It should have been keyworded. It should just be keyword Fire Slayers. Anyway, last question I've got for you is how do you deploy? With so little models, how do you deploy? And obviously it's going to change depending on who you're fighting, but do you have any tactics or thoughts around your deployment? Thank you, Matt. It is the Battlesmith. Yes. Please don't go out and buy a Battlesmith until it's FAQ'd, and then we see, like, if it's If it's actually 4-up rally for everybody in order, happy days. Go buy a Battlesmith.
Yeah, that would be tasty.
Imagine
so
that. Bring back like your Fulminators on a 4-up, bringing back Dragons on a 4-up. What a nightmare.
that's a dirty meta. But yeah, so as far as deployment goes, that depends on the roll-off. That's the biggest determining factor. If I win the roll-off and I'm going first, hey, baby, it's all on the line. Like, I'm going to put everybody on the line. Those crossbows are going to be dead center where they can reach whatever you put, wherever you put it, to make sure that you either give me targets or put your stuff all the way in the back corners. Or if they win the roll-off and they're going to have the choice, I'm going to null deploy. I'm going to put everything on the back line, because that's what dragons are so good at with that once per game movement, is making up that distance. If there are objectives in the middle of the table that you think you're just going to hop on and hold, I can start off on my back line in my back corner and still threaten almost every objective on the board very quickly. So null deploying with dragons is amazing. It's amazing. It's one of the few armies where you can do that and not lose a turn. You can very easily catch back up, get back to the middle, contest or take those objectives from your opponent, and potentially forbid them from some very damaging shooting.
No, I dig it, absolutely. And it does allow you to play the field. I think it plays well to me as well, because I don't like to play aggressive. I'm more of a counter style play. So I never take battle regiment because I don't care about it. Like, you want me to go first? Cool, I'll go do something. You want me to go second? Cool, I'll go do something. It's never a part of like I do this, then this, then this. Either the plan works or the plan doesn't work. And the dragons play well to that, which is again why I was drawn to it. Compared to like the Fulminators, are stronger, they're cheaper. They shouldn't be cheaper, but they are cheaper. but like, they don't have the counterplay. Like, they've got one trick, they do it really well, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I'm not drawn to the Fulminators.
I think we
Plus,
all
they're
know.
not nearly as cool.
Yeah, I think we all know what you're paying for with the difference in price between the Fulminators and the Dragons is that free once per game movement. That's it. That's the money. Like, that's the difference between the Dragons being as slow as Fulminators and not being able to alpha strike effectively, or just being wherever they want to be immediately. Yeah, I saw Matt's comment there. They do it in Medicine Cities. Yeah, Fulminators are the trickiest thing in Living City. It's dirty. But outside of that, if you're just
even like
Stormcast,
in Tempest Die, you get the +3 movement, +1 armor save in the first battle round. Like, that's normally enough to get you into combat.
For sure. But the dragons aren't reliant on anything to do it. They function in every phase of the game exactly as they want to, pretty effectively. And that's the difference. That's what you're paying for, is arguably the best all-around unit in the game.
Yeah, I agree. I hope they don't go up any more in points. I think their points, you start pointing them too aggressively and you're going to see them out of the game. Maybe the battle line will change. If we really get into a crazy type of, like, everyone's just running dragons, maybe battle line will change, and maybe there's been the rumors of a wizardy Knight Draconis. Maybe that comes in and changes the way you kick them out a little bit or whatever. But I'm a big fan of dragons either way. And I think whether you go all or none, or you're a potato like me and you love to run Krondus and Kazurai, and I've got both of them. I got both. I actually have both, not magnetized, but I can't justify both on the table. It's either one or the other. They're both very cool. I'm probably a Kazurai man at the moment. If the meta shifts a little bit and it comes back to, as you said, slows down and a bit more board control, and Nurgly types to grind us down, and Deepkin's denying our shooting, and more of those type of armies. Nighthorn is another one. Maybe Krondo will come out and hit the table again, but I just needed too much protection from him for those Praetors or Gardas.
Yeah, I think for me, I drop off a little bit more on the number of dragons as well. I said earlier, I like the one-off dragon. So run the Draconis, your one-off one-man dragon squad, and maybe a two-man battle line. Just to have some of that maneuverability, that late-game objective capping, and some of the counterplay and counter moves. And then you've got plenty of points to play with for the rest of the army. You've got so many options in Stormcast. But I think I'm pivoting more to using them as a quality skirmish unit rather than an alpha striking front line.
I think people are learning how to play against them, and it's like the current Suns. Like Suns were terrorizing in the first part of third edition. I think, dragons are now kind of like everyone's like, oh, shiny and cool, and everyone wants to Game of Thrones it with all their dragons and their D&D and all that type of thing. And there'll come a time where people will learn how to counter them, how to pull them down, and realize they don't have enough bodies on the objectives. They're not doing nearly enough damage on the breath weapon. So maybe the spam is not the right approach. So I'm not trying to put it down on their kids, but enjoy the time in the sun. People will build counters pretty quickly. So I think what you've done, which is that mixed combined force, which is having some dragons, but also some other things, whether it is your long strikes, your adjudicators, your night judicator, there's whatever liberators I think still have a play. Chariots. I really like chariots. I really like the Stormcast chariot.
I think they're also a high mobility jack of all trades unit, and I think they're going to see some play as well.
Yeah, interesting. And Matt from Team Canada is saying there's no Stormdrake Guard in this GT. Interesting. Sounds very interesting. But Cody, is there anyone you want to shout out? Anything else you want to share? We've obviously had a really cool deep dive into the dragons, and take from this what you will, kids. We're not saying that Krondus and Kazurai are not good. It's just if I was taking them to a tournament for the point investment and also the points that I need to keep them around, it is a big point sink. And when you look at the comparison of having just more Stormdrake Guard, you get more wounds, probably consistent damage output, give or take. You're probably better off, to maximize those Stormdrake Guard. But if you want to run Krondo, if you want to run Kazurai, if you want to run a mixed force or a full force, you do you. There are competitive builds, but just know that probably if you want the most optimum, it's going to be around lots and lots and lots of Stormdrake Guard. But you've proven, Cody, that you can go 4-1 with a mixed force. And hey, you pulled out doggos, you pulled out some units that we probably weren't expecting from a 4-1 list.
For sure. And I would say, honestly, just have fun with it. Don't take the game too seriously, especially if you're running dragons. Like, you get to run dragons. It's one of the few times in this game where, like, the rule of cool, the models I was really excited about running actually turned out to be good. So win or lose, you still get to run dragons, man. And that's cool.
Yeah, it's just an absolute potato fest of just like running around with our dragons and gargants, and now Magma drops the battle line. So who knows? It's just going to be the race to how little models you have on the table. But
I can't wait to watch the look on some people's face the first time a 4-man unit of dragons bounces off a Leviathan. Whoopsie doopsie. I don't think they kill it.
I did. Yeah, no, they won't. No, I smashed a turtle over the weekend with Kragnos, so that was fun. But it has a little bit more hitting power than a dragon.
For sure.
Just a little. That damage 4 mace is just brutal. But you're from the Battle Ready Wargaming group. Do you want to give them a shout out? Anyone you want to kind of shout out before we kind of wrap things up?
Just always thank you to our sponsor, Robert. He runs our little group of degenerates. He's the one that ran that big, it was almost a major. We had some drops, but the major up in Albany this past weekend. He puts together good events, and he tries to get the right kind of players, guys that are going to be bros in addition to just being good players. So shout out to all my teammates for always being quality at events and for representing well. And, thanks to all my opponents for teaching me the lessons that have helped me get this far by beating them over my head.
And your sponsor, not mine. I get no money from that.
For sure.
I have no sponsors. My people are my sponsors. But Cody, this was awesome. This was really cool. In fact, I'm going to be painting this weekend my dragon. So Kragnos is done. Tournament is over. It's all on the next one. And all my dragons are built, ready to be painted. Just got to do a final few customizations, and then I'm going to paint them. But you're a legend. Thank you so much for your insights, folks. If you enjoyed it, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, hashtag, all that good stuff. Thank you, everyone, to my patrons. Thank you for everyone who has joined the live stream or you're watching this on replay. And until next time, roll more sixes. Thanks for sticking around until the end. I hope you found that video interesting and you walked away with a few new ideas. If you did, I would appreciate it if you hit like on the video, as well as left me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. The conversation will continue over on Discord, so links down below in the episode description if you want to join the Discord and continue the Age of Sigmar conversation. I want to give a massive shout out as well to these absolute bloody legends, these champions who have continued to support me through Patreon or YouTube members. That is going directly into supporting the maintenance and the growth of this channel. So thank you very much, guys. Much appreciated. And until next time, roll more sixes.